Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Thunder and Lightning Gaming. And what you're about to hear is a script that I wrote over a year ago. I did this thing about a little over a year ago during quarantine, and Chris and I thought it would be a good idea for a video, but we decided to sit on it until Halloween this year. So throughout the video, I might come back with some fact checking or some opinion changes here and there. So just look out for that. And other than that, please enjoy the video. I watched every single Friday the 13th film in 1 week. I knew very little about the series beforehand, and I also had no particular reason or motivation to start this endeavor. I simply went downstairs one day, noticed we owned most of them, and started watching them. But before I start synopsizing every film and giving my review on each one, I want to clarify a few things. I don't typically seek out horror films. There's a few I've seen and a couple I really like, but overall I'm not too crazy for them. But I think there's a distinction to be made between horror films and slasher films. I feel like movies like Paranormal Activity, Insidious, and It Follows are horror films, with movies like Halloween and Scream being slasher films. There's of course some overlap here and there, but the fact of the matter is VHS gave me nightmares for months, and I slept fine after watching 12 Friday the 13th films. In fact, I did have a few dreams about them, but none of them were nightmares. So, without further ado, let's go over each film one at a time. Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th starts the series off strong. It tells the story of Pamela Voorhees and her son Jason. In 1953, Jason was attending Camp Crystal Lake, where he was left to drown in Crystal Lake due to the camp counselors doing things like having sex and doing drugs instead of watching the kids. The following year, in 1954, two of the counselors responsible were murdered, and the camp was shut down until 1980, when a small group of teenagers arrive at Camp Crystal Lake a few days ahead of the kids. They start getting killed off one by one, and by the end you find out it's Pamela Voorhees doing the killing, taking her revenge for her son's death. After successfully killing basically every character in the movie, she meets her demise at the hand of the one and only remaining survivor, Alice. Alice takes a rowboat out onto the lake where she falls asleep waiting for the police. When she wakes up the next morning, she's grabbed and pulled into the water by a still living Jason, who now appears to be some sort of lake monster in what is quite possibly the best and most frightening jump scare twist at the end of any movie ever. Whether or not this happened, however, is up to interpretation. This movie is great and offers a very clean start to a film series that ends up to be rather convoluted for better or for worse. It sets up most of the lore that carries the rest of the films well into the 21st century. It also established 3 tropes that appear in virtually every movie: the Harbinger, the Final Girl, and skinny dipping. The Harbinger refers to the character that warns the other characters of the curse that plagues Crystal Lake and its various attractions. It's in almost every movie and is a slasher film touchstone, often parodied in other works. The Final Girl refers to the last 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, where Jason has killed every other character except for one girl, and she has to try her best to survive, usually succeeding somehow. Keep in mind that even though it's called The Final Girl, sometimes it's 2 characters and sometimes it's a male. And skinny dipping. There is so much goddamn skinny dipping in the Friday the 13th films, and I do not understand the fascination. Honestly, the quality of a Friday the 13th film can usually be defined by if they go skinny dipping or not, and I'm only kind of joking. Update from the future. At this part of the script, I say that they go skinny dipping in the first Friday the 13th movie. They, in fact, do not. Friday the 13th, Part 2. Part 2 is a little worse than the first one in my opinion, only due to how similar it is to the first film. In this movie, the attention shifts over to Jason Voorhees, who's actually for real still alive somehow. They never explain how he survived drowning, which sort of bothered me, but I got over it. And because he was still alive, he saw his mother get murdered. Jason Voorhees is a being that acts on revenge only if revenge is immediately attainable, which is established in the first scene of this movie, where he kills the character Alice, the last surviving girl from the first Friday the 13th movie, before returning home to Crystal Lake to murder whomever is unlucky enough to call it sanctuary for now. This time around, it's counselors in training, and from there, it's rinse and repeat Friday the 13th stuff. Jason Voorhees kills a bunch of teenagers, except one, Ginny, who survives in what ends up being the best final girl sequence in the whole series. Also, if I may say, elderly woman killing because she thinks her son is telling her is like way scarier than Hillbilly Lake Monster Man. Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. Part 3 is the best one so far. It features the most interesting cast of characters yet, and some of the most inventive kills we've seen thus far. In the first two movies, you see almost all of the kills from the killer's perspective until the reveal at the end of who's actually doing it. But in this film, the first-person camera kills come to an end when Jason finally stumbles upon his iconic hockey mask. This one's got a lot of 80s jank, but I can't fault the film for that. It came out in the 1980s. I also wanted to bring up the weird and interesting way these movies handle character developments. These movies, especially this one, spend so much time dealing with character development, and for what? 90% of them are going to die. This character from Part 3, called Shelley, is the first character I would describe as sympathetic, and is a character we spend most of our time with for the first half of the movie, and he's killed off screen. Also, I disagree with calling these movies Part 2 and Part 3, etc. Calling something part implies it's one section of one big cohesive story, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Part 1 was made to curtail off the success of the first Halloween film, and Parts 2 to 11 were cash-ins off the success of the first film. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. It's the last one! The hilariously named fourth movie is the worst one so far, but only by a little. It doesn't fail or succeed in any specific regard when compared to its predecessors. It does have the unique distinction of taking place in the actual town of Crystal Lake, with only the skinny dipping scene taking place at the actual lake. This is also the movie that introduces Tommy Jarvis, and if there was ever one single character besides Jason to pin as the main character of the series, it's Tommy. In this movie, he's a 12-year-old boy, and he's the character that actually kills Jason. By the end of this movie, Jason is actually dead for real after a couple fake-outs in the previous installment in this, his final chapter. Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. You might as well have just called this one Friday the 13th. The last one made so much goddamn money that we had to make this one. I'm just going to put it plain and simple. This one sucks. I really didn't like it. Tommy Jarvis, now an adult, is being institutionalized at a halfway house due to killing Jason, leaving him with a lot more mental baggage than we previously thought. He's hallucinating seeing Jason throughout the film, and every time he does, he manages to rid himself of the villain, so when Jason actually does show up, there's a moment where Tommy assumes he's fake. In this movie, the cops really seem convinced that it's a copycat killer, and as it turns out, it totally was. Jason isn't in this film at all, and is in fact still dead. All the murders were perpetrated by Roy Burns, who wanted revenge for a completely different and unimportant murder that happened early on in the film. So Jason is still totally dead. Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Tommy Jarvis is back, and this time, he's cool. Tommy and his friend are on their way to Jason's grave. Tommy plans to burn his corpse because he thinks that will stop his nightmares. He digs up Jason's grave, pours gasoline on him, lets his emotions get the better of him, and stabs Jason with a portion of a broken fence nearby. Lightning strikes the fence, and Jason is reanimated. We are now fully within the realm of science fiction, and I think the movie is better for it. There's no more, how'd he survive? How is he indestructible? He's a zombie now. Jason Voorhees is now a being with actual superpowers. Also, this movie is phenomenal. For once, we have interesting characters and an engaging story. And wouldn't you know it, no skinny dipping scene. It's almost like if you come up with a compelling enough story, you don't have time for a skinny dipping scene. Also, is that what I think it is? Oh my god, a gun! Finally, someone tries to shoot Jason. It's a little too late, but still, good effort, Sheriff Dude. In this movie, Jason is doing random killings, but whenever Tommy shows up, he stops in his track and goes after Tommy, the person who killed him. In this movie, there's actual kids at the camp. Jason doesn't kill any of them, he never kills children, but the movie is made more suspenseful due to their inclusion. Also, this movie has by far one of the coolest Easter eggs that also acts as a bit of lore that I don't actually really want to spoil. Just know that if you pay attention to what the characters say about the legacy of Jason and the lake throughout these films, there's a really cool payoff in the final act of this movie. Tommy manages to trap Jason at the bottom of the lake as we move into Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. In 1987, Paramount Pictures wanted to make a crossover with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. When that fell through, screenwriter Daryl Hanney suggested, well, what about Jason versus Carrie? This didn't exactly work out either, but that is the reason that Jason fights a girl with psychic powers in this one. When Tina Shepard was a child, she accidentally killed her father with her powers, trapping him at the bottom of Crystal Lake. Now, returning to the lake as a teenager, she uses her psychic powers to once again resurrect Jason Voorhees. Jason wasn't actually dead, of course, just sort of dormant. But now he's back, and barring the psychic powers, this is a pretty cookie-cutter Friday the 13th film. Jason looks incredible in this film. His outfit is shredded, and you can see his spine and rib cage through his skinless, exposed back and chest. And the face reveal at the end of this film is the best one to date. There wasn't one in Part 6. We only see his face briefly in the dark after he's resurrected. And in this one, he's indoors in a well-lit room, and he's 100% zombie now, and he looks awesome. You can really see all the damage that's been done to him over the past 6 films. The only problem I have with this movie is the ending, which only makes a little sense, and Jason is once again trapped at the bottom of the lake. This movie also stars Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees, a role he'd go on to play in the next 3 installments. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. This one is boring. Picture this: Jason, but on a boat. Sounds cool, right? Jason Voorhees loose on a vessel where all the people aboard are trapped and can only run as far as there is boat. Then why is it called Jason Takes Manhattan? The movie only takes place in Manhattan for about 15 minutes at the end, so why not Jason at Sea or something like that? This movie tries so hard to be something it's not, and it actually messes with established continuity. Not to mention, the timeline of certain mentions events don't add up. This is the most skippable Friday the 13th movie yet. Even though he also dies in this one, the next one starts with him back at Camp Crystal Lake, and his face in this one just looks dumb. I get that he looks more like a lake creature, but I really think we shouldn't have left the zombie aesthetic. Also, sometimes Jason does stuff just to be scary, and I usually ignore it, but he does it a lot in this film. Jason's supposed to be a mindless, indestructible killer, and it doesn't make sense when he shows his face to a bunch of kids just to scare them, or is chasing the final girl through the streets and subway system of Manhattan, killing nobody else. Worst one by far, which is saying a lot because the next one is called Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. This movie is the first made by New Line Cinema and was made to promote Freddy vs. Jason, a movie that would stay in development hell until 10 years later. This movie is the weirdest one by far, which is saying a lot. This one follows a bounty hunter who's made a career out of being a Jason Voorhees expert. Jason is killed by the American government in the first scene. His remains are given to a mortician who notices Jason's heart is still beating, so he eats it. Jason's soul is now a body-swapping demon that takes the form of a little rat thing. His goal to find its way into the body of another Voorhees, only then can he be fully resurrected. Enter Diana, Jessica, and Samantha Voorhees, Jason's sister, his niece, and her daughter. After Jason kills Diana, the bounty hunter reveals to Jessica that she's the only one who can kill him, so she uses a magic dagger to... You know what, I'm gonna stop there. This movie is crazy for many reasons. It's not the worst one, and I think it's because it's so different that it kept my attention. It wasn't good by any means, but it tried something new, and that's at least a little commendable. However, and I've never seen anyone complain about this, the worst part of the film by far is the poster. Look at this. This poster has nothing to do with the film. The fire implying the movie takes place in hell, which it does not. This mask is completely not seen or worn by Jason or anyone else, and this snake thing doesn't make an appearance. Jason, when he's in his out-of-body form, looks like this, not this snake demon thing. Jason X. Jason Voorhees. But in space. This movie stars Alexa Doge, who would go on to guest star on seasons 5 through 8 of Arrow as legacy character Talia al Ghul. Something that only I care about. I'm just proud I recognized an actor in one of these movies besides the obvious big ones. And would you believe me if I told you this is one of the best ones? It's not as good as 6 or 7 or even the first one, but for what it is and what it's trying to do, I think it really works. So this movie is clearly meant to be viewed as last, as it takes place in the future of 2008, where Jason is being held captive by the American government. They plan to conduct research on his regenerative tissue and how he's able to survive after taking so many fatal blows. One thing leads to another, and him and our main character are frozen in cryosleep and woken up in the year 2445. Now it's Jason versus a crew of people manning a spaceship. This movie does the Jason Voorhees in a contained space thing, but it does it way better than Part 8 did. This movie doesn't take itself too seriously, and I think it's better for it. It's full of self-referential comedy with one of the funniest jokes in the whole series history that I definitely won't spoil. Sometimes Friday the 13th movies try to be funny, and it usually falls flat. These movies aren't supposed to be funny, they're supposed to be scary. But this movie doubles down on the humor, and it does a good job taking advantage of the situation our characters are in. It also has the best kill in series history and the coolest Harbinger scene. It also confirms something that I thought was the case for many films. Jason actually has premarital sex spidey senses. It's what ultimately brings him back to life. If you're marathoning these movies and you're not looking forward to Jason X, like I wasn't, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Alright, what's next? Oh, shit. I watched every single A Nightmare on Elm Street film in 1 week. That's right, the same week. I watched 20 films in 1 week. So I'm not going to go over these with the same level of detail because this video is about Friday the 13th, but I did watch them all, so I am going to talk about them briefly. They follow the story of Freddy Krueger, the ghost of a child serial killer who met his demise when the parents of Elm Street killed him by burning him alive. He now haunts the teenagers of Elm Street's dreams, and if he kills you in your dream, you're dead for real. The first one is pretty good. A solid start to the series, if not a little confusing. Young Johnny Depp. The second one, Freddy's Revenge, is the worst one and the most skippable entry. I don't even want to talk about it. Part 3, The Dream Warriors, is very good. It stars Heather Langenkamp reprising her role as Nancy from the first film, so it feels more like a direct sequel. The fourth one, Dream Master, is okay. It starts the trend of the main character of the last one is in this one for a third of the movie, then focuses shift to their friend. The fifth one, Dream Child, is definitely interesting, if not a little too similar to the fourth one. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare is probably the weakest entry since 2, but it does have some of the most interesting and creative nightmare sequences. And then we arrive at Wes Craven's New Nightmare. This movie is a cinematic masterpiece. It once again stars Heather Langenkamp, this time playing Heather Langenkamp. This movie is essentially a Nightmare on Elm Street movie about the making of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but Freddy Krueger is a real being that haunts and attempts to kill the cast and crew. I really don't want to talk about it too much. I really think this is a movie that should be viewed with little to no context going in. Just keep in mind, it's not connected to the same canon as the 6 previous films. Also worth mentioning, this is the only film out of the 20 I watched whose runtime went over an hour and 40 minutes. Seriously, none of these movies clock in over an hour and 40 minutes, but this one is nearly 2 hours long. It really feels like they know what they had. Ultimately, these films were fine. I was overall less interested in them than I was in Friday the 13th films, but I did end up liking a couple of them quite a lot. It's interesting to compare the two. See, as I mentioned earlier, the first Friday the 13th was made to capitalize on the success of the first Halloween film and went on from there. But Wes Craven had a vision that may have gotten a little muddied with subsequent entries, but a vision nonetheless. They couldn't be more different, but still managed to share some pretty bizarre similarities, like the fact that each villain only acts on revenge when applicable, otherwise killing for fun or just because. Or the fact that by the later installments, you find out Freddy and Jason have living family members that we've never heard of until now. I also think it's funny that the 9th Friday the 13th movie and the 6th Elm Street movie are subtitled The Final Friday and The Final Nightmare, respectively. Freddy vs. Jason. Finally, after all this build-up, after 17 movies, we arrive at Freddy vs. Jason. And I gotta say, it's not that great. The scenes where they actually fight are pretty cool, but there's only 2 of them, and we spend most of our time with like the weirdest group of kids since the final chapter. Basically, this is a Freddy movie with some Jason mixed in. Freddy manages to convince Jason to come back to life, somehow, so he can go to Elm Street and start killing, so that people think it's Freddy and people start to remember him, because that's how he comes back, I guess. And like, Freddy, I'm talking directly to you now. What did you think was going to happen? Your plan was destined to fail from the beginning for the exact reason it did fail. And then you got so mad at him. Like, what were you expecting? This film also tries to say that Jason has an actual fear of water, even though it rains in like most Friday the 13th films, and he literally walks through Crystal Lake like the zombies from Pirates of the Caribbean. Something, I might add, that he does in this movie. For all the build-up this movie had, it really has very little going for it. It has some of the weirdest dialogue, and I know I mentioned this already, but not enough screen time for Jason. I won't spoil what happens or who wins, but the ending is sort of the worst part once again. Also, we never see hell. Between the 9th movie being called Jason Goes to Hell, Jason dying multiple times canonically, Freddy suffering his own temporary demise a few times, and the back of the Freddy vs. Jason box saying this, we never see what hell looks like. So, I want to propose something. If this movie took place in hell, even for like 10 minutes, wouldn't it have been cool to see a dead Tommy Jarvis and Nancy Thompson, even if it's just for a brief cameo? I just feel like Freddy vs. Jason could have been a little more fan service, and I think visiting hell would have been a great way to reintroduce old legacy characters from both series. Which leads us into the last two films for today's video, the reboot. A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010 and Friday the 13th from 2009. So, let's briefly start with A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I have to ask, why don't people like this movie? I liked it a lot. As far as a movie that's rebooting a franchise that ended up being perhaps a little more goofy than originally intended, but this time trying to take itself more seriously, I think it succeeds. It's filled with references and callbacks to the original films and has a great ending. I liked it a lot, and I don't understand everyone's beef with it. And lastly, we have the Friday the 13th reboot. This movie marketed itself as a hard reboot, but the more I watched it, it almost seemed like a retelling of the first 4 films, taking elements from all of them, which I found interesting as I began piecing together which scenes were inspired by which film. And it was fine. It was really just sort of a basic, rather average Friday the 13th film. It didn't take any risks, and for that it gets the good old stamp of approval. It has a confusing ending, but hey, what else is new? And that's it. 20 movies, 20 mini reviews, and 1 week of my life that I'll never get back, well spent. The best Friday the 13th movie is Part 6, and the worst is Part 8. The best Nightmare on Elm Street movie is New Nightmare, and the worst one is Freddy's Revenge, the second one. But what was the best film I watched? It was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, believe it or not, with Jason Lives coming in incredibly close second. I really didn't expect that, honestly. I didn't expect to like any of these movies, to be perfectly honest, but they really did cast their weird charm on me. Also, if you watch this video and are motivated to marathon them yourself, I think I have a pretty definitive watch list, and it's basically how I watch them with just a few tweaks. You start with Friday the 13th, 1 through 3, then 4 through 6, then 7 through 9. Splitting them up this way gives you the original trilogy, the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, and the Kane Hodder trilogy, even though Kane Hodder is in Jason X. Then, after Jason Goes to Hell, you start watching A Nightmare on Elm Street from the beginning, and you watch up until Freddy's Dead the Final Friday. Then you watch Freddy vs. Jason. After that, watch Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Jason X in any order, these being the soft reboots, and then watch A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010 and Friday the 13th from 2009 in any order, these being the hard reboots. So hi, we're back to Future Timeline, unscripted Thunder from Thunder and Lightning Gaming. And I didn't really write an outro to this video, so I thought I'd give a little update on my, relationship with this series as the last year has unfolded. And I gotta say, these movies really have stuck with me. I planned on rewatching them all over again. I still am planning that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. The only one I've given a second viewing is the first Friday the 13th movie at this point. But I'm really excited to start getting into them. I liked Wes Craven's New Nightmare so much that I bought the novelization of it because I hear that it's like a little different and just as good as the movie, so I'm really excited to read that. This is the part where I would talk about Jason or Freddy comic books, but there aren't really that many that are easily accessible to watch. Consuming these movies like this has really gotten me to be like a more generalized horror fan. Like I sort of have like a list of horror movies that I haven't watched that I plan on watching in the next couple months. And I wasn't always like this. I'm excited to give I'm excited to give Scream a try. I think Chris and I are going to watch a couple of the Purge movies together. Yeah, even a year later, I find myself really liking these movies and looking back on this experience with a lot of fondness, and I can't wait to watch them all again. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Halloween, and if you want more Freddy vs. Jason content, Lightning and I have a video essay from a few months ago where we made a pitch for a movie that does not exist yet that basically just combines all the Versus series. So we have Freddy vs. Jason, Alien vs. Predator, King Kong and Godzilla, and we threw Rocky in there because we both love Rocky. It was really fun to make, and it came out really good. So if you want more, links to that will be in the end card, which is going to happen right now. Thank you for listening and watching, and if you like what you see, please be sure to subscribe.
Our channel is daily uploads from podcasts to video essays, Let's Plays to skits.
Be sure to find us on Twitch and Patreon.
Our theme song is Sunny Day by Froggy and the Friendship, and our Let's Play intro is Sunny Bit by the same band.
Link to all these in the description below. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.